More reaction to the news coming out of Indianapolis, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. He is Evan Klosky at EKlosky WTSP. And I am here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. Evan is typically here every Wednesday, but because my schedule is insane, he's here on a Thursday this week.
We're bringing the T in WTSP.
There it is. That's perfect. And of course, I want to thank you for your continued support of the show. Right now, one of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. And as Evan can tell you, those one-on-one text messages are a great time, as long as it's not about Ohio State football. You can become an insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Jason Licht mentioned some key names that need to be brought back and potentially to fire up another boat parade, but most notably left one name out. More on that in a little bit. But Evan, let's start with some of the biggest things going on in Indianapolis as it pertains to the Bucs. And we're going to kick things off with Jason Licht and Todd Bowles' comments regarding Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield. Now, I talked at length about this on yesterday's episode, so if you haven't heard that, go back and do so. But I spoke about the comments and kind of my interpretation of the comments. You always have to read between the lines when coaches and GMs speak. But I'd like to get your thoughts because obviously these are two of the bigger concerns for Bucs fans, right? Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield. Let's start with Mike Evans. Jason Licht emphasized a couple of times how much they want Mike back. They mentioned that Mike wants to retire a Buccaneer, but that Jason Licht is willing to put a strain on the financial side if need be in order to get a deal done. Last week, you and I talked about how the Bucs are likely going to let Evans test the market to see what he gets. Based off the comments from Jason Licht and Todd Bowles yesterday and kind of the way, at least I interpreted the trajectory of these conversations, have you changed at all in your stance that they're going to let Evans test the market, or do you think maybe, they're still going to let that happen, or how do you see that kind of playing out now?
I don't know if they have much of a choice. I think there's probably a number out there where Evans would not test the market. I don't know if the Buccaneers are willing to really kind of go against themselves and put that number out at the doorstep. He's turned 31. That's the reality of it. So if that's what his agent truly believes, give us 30, then Jason Light's going to be like, come circle back to me when we're going to have a more reasonable conversation. And if you get 30, man, I applaud you. I'll root for you from here. And that's just the way it goes. But my guess is it will be closer to 25 than 30. I do walk away from the combine and listening to Jason Licht, Todd Bowles, and the oodles and oodles of interviews I went through. That's not just at the podium. That's the side conversations that both of them had with the Tampa area media. Then, they also did their car wash where they went on to a handful of different places. I feel more optimistic that the Buccaneers are going to get Mike Evans back. I think he's still that one variable of I can't quite put my finger on it. I'm definitely the least sure about him as opposed to some of the other guys Antoine Winfield Jr., who 100% is coming back next year in some form or fashion. But when Jason Licht says something of we're we understand it's going to put a little strain on us, but, we're ultimately going to put in that work. To me, it seems like they've already gone through the thought process of, we're not going to be happy with the number we have to give up, but we're probably going to give it up. That's what that sounds like. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be exorbitant to the fact of, it's going to be, some crazy figure. My guess is whatever is being floated out there, whatever Mike can gather, the Bucs will be pretty close to that. So, and then you have to also talk about his market, which I'm sure there will be some interest, but I also don't know exactly who is in the market for a $25 to $26 million wide receiver turning 31. The Buccaneers have the emotional and sweat equity with them, especially in the community. There are some variables that don't show up in the field that are extremely important when talking about Mike Evans. Very similar when talking about Steven Stamkos. They're both going through similar situations. Though Mike Evans having a much better free agent or had a much better free agent year than what Stamkos is having right now. But I digress. I just think that I leave optimistic, and all signs, all the ways that Light and Bowles. I mean, Bowles doesn't seem like he's really in the know. It's just like, I hope I can't envision playing without Mike. I hope that he retires. But him is just crossing toes and fingers. Jason spoke a little bit more directly about it versus, and we'll get to it, like a Devin White, where it's like, scream, yeah, we're just okay, we're moving on. It's just one of those things where you can read between the lines easier.
Yeah, well, and of course, the other big thing that was talked about was Baker Mayfield, and both Jason Light and Bowles talked about how important he was to the team, how much they want him back. We all knew that. We all know how much Baker wants to return. But again, kind of some glowing comments and talk about how these conversations are moving forward pretty well. And Jason Light even said something to the effect of, we want him to be a Buck. He wants to be a Buck, and that's a good starting point. I said on yesterday's show, I felt like either Mike or Baker was going to get done before the open negotiating window began. Do you see a deal for Baker getting done before that window opens on March 11th?
There's a part of me that thinks that the Buccaneers, and this is just maybe it's more of a hope, but a part of me thinks with all this juggling, because the Bucs really do have to go through conversations with Mike, Baker, Antoine, Tristan, Chase. They got to go Levante. They got to have all these conversations at one time. It can't just be, hey, I'm going to have my appetizer, then I'm going to go to entrees and desserts. So not that they'll do this for everybody, but there's a part of me that thinks it would be quite the maneuver if at once you say, we are going to bring back Baker and Mike in one press, like kind of in one press release. The boys are back. Because I think if you get one done, then the other is ultimately like you've landed. If you've reached an agreement with one side, then you pretty much know where you have to go with the other. So unless it's really like just you guys are not meeting eye to eye, then I think it's easier that way. Ultimately, the Baker one, I have a tough time believing anyone's going to step up to the plate and knock the Bucs off the Baker wagon, right? It just, again, Baker is invested in the city. The team invested in him. It's going to cost probably $30 million per year for Baker, that is. So again, circling back to Mike's number of 30, Baker's probably going to get 30 per year, and he's the quarterback. And that's just always going to be valued the most. But, I don't think the market is that big for Baker. And if you're an opposing GM, you're another GM in this league, do you really want to risk like your job on Baker Mayfield? Because that's what it comes down to. Like if you sign Baker Mayfield for 4 years, $120 million, as Spot Track is reporting, and that falls on your face, you are fired. Big time fired. So to me, the Buccaneers can go into next season with ease making that sort of deal because you know what you got, similar system, continuity, and he really just did you a solid. And I know it was kind of like a help me, help you. Baker called up the Bucs and said, I want to play for you. And the Bucs said, you know what? That sounds like a pretty good idea. We'll put you in a battle for Trask. But what, he made like $6 million last year? I mean, so the Buccaneers can be like, we paid pennies for Baker. His performance really put us into a stratosphere we didn't think we were going to have to be in, considering of that dead money. Again, reminder, anybody out there, the Buccaneers were like the first team with number one in dead money to make the playoffs in 10 years or so. So I just think that, again, just like the Mike Evans thing, the Buccaneers are emotionally invested into Baker like none other team out there can be, and are willing to probably stomach the number more than any other team out there, in my opinion, with the caveat that Mike, I think teams would enjoy him a little bit more. That it's a little bit easier to work a wide receiver in versus going all into your quarterback, because if you're signing Baker Mayfield, you're pushing the chips in like this is our guy to lead us to the promised land.
Yeah, that's pretty similar to a lot of the sentiments that I had on yesterday's episode. I kind of figured Mike and Baker were going to combine for about $50 million, maybe a little bit more, and it'll be interesting to see how all of those chips fall. But a very interesting omission by Jason Licht on Tuesday. That is next here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. I know in my life, I am constantly running around figuring out how I'm going to get my son to this tournament or that game while juggling my jobs as well as the financial aspect. But when all is said and done, I know that that's going to be what I look back on most fondly in my life. However, that doesn't alleviate the stress that it causes in the short term. Speaking to someone who is unbiased can give me an outsider's point of view and helps me compartmentalize the stresses I'm feeling while helping me see the bigger picture. And sometimes it's best to have that person to help you keep perspective. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So, Jason Licht was asked about if there was a group in this year's free agency class that's particularly deep. And Licht responded by saying, well, yeah, there always are. But like I said before, we're focused on signing ours right now. I mean, if we can re-sign Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield and Lavonte David, Chase McLaughlin, Antoine Winfield Jr., and Tristan Wirfs, I mean, we should be throwing another boat parade. So that's a pretty good class there. End quote. I'm going to say this again. If we can re-sign Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield and Lavonte David, Chase McLaughlin, Antoine Winfield Jr., and Tristan Wirfs. Evan, he didn't say Devin White in there, and he didn't go back and correct himself. He didn't throw him in at the end. He just flat out did not mention Jason Licht. Or he didn't mention Devin White. So did Jason Licht just confirm that the Bucs aren't even interested in bringing him back?
Yeah, and we've talked about this for a while now. Devin's gone. The moment that, I mean, when I'm there in Detroit and you watching at home, and KJ Britt is playing most of the snaps in a divisional playoff game, and Devin's butt's on the bench, he's gone. You know that? I mean, it just, no one on the record will ever say it like this, and and I certainly have not been told this directly, but they're sick of his crap. I just think it's over. Like it just did. Bowles and Devin have a great relationship, and Bowles fought tooth and nail for him at every step that he could. But even Bowles was out there in Indianapolis going, you can't pay everybody when asked about Devin. Didn't say that for other guys, but with Devin, it's like, look, at some point, so it is what it is. Devin's going to move on. Devin, really, the last 2 years in Tampa Bay, did not ingratiate himself to the fan base much. But I just always want to remember people that what Devin White did for this franchise, coming in, dominant first 3 years of his career, that we need to respect that. Down 3 to 4 years, 3.5. We need to respect what Devin White did for this organization. He was a pivotal part of bringing a Super Bowl to Tampa Bay, and he did fight through some injuries, and it's really unfortunate that he screwed up his foot this season almost immediately. To be honest, go think back to week 3 against the Eagles when he caught that interception and was just, hobbling his way to the sideline versus getting, a healthy Devin White books that to the house. So unfortunate, not surprising. KJ doesn't have the ceiling of Devin White, but he does all the things that he's supposed to do, which is half the battle there at linebacker. So
something else that jumped out to me among all of the players that were talked about in Indianapolis was something that Todd Bowles said. And I bring this up because this is a guy, I've been pumping his tires a lot since last season. You were pumping his tires back during the draft process before he was even drafted, and that's Zion McCullum. And Bowles was asked about Zion McCullum and where he might play next year. And he said, quote, "We'll see by time free agency and the draft ends up. We'll see where our pieces are to see where we can move them." It's a tricky thing because he can play corner, he can play safety, he can play nickel, he can play either safety spot. So where he plays kind of won't be determined probably until the summer, end quote. This to me sounds like they are going to put Zion in a spot that needs filled rather than a spot that he himself earned. And I feel that he earned a starting corner spot, probably opposite Jamel Dean. I've talked a lot about the Bucs potentially moving on from Carlton Davis, but Evan, this doesn't really sound like a ringing endorsement of what I think a lot of us saw from McCullum last year.
I actually view it the opposite way.
Okay.
I view it as Zion's going to be involved, but there are a lot of dominoes that haven't fallen yet, and we got to figure that out. So let's just say, hypothetically speaking, we're going to part ways with Carlton Davis. I'm not going to come out here on February 27th of when he said it and tell you that, yeah, we foresee Zion McCullum being our starting cornerback next year. Well, let me do the math. If Carlton and to me, it's either A, we have a plan for Zion, we're not telling you, which is the old Todd Bowles special of it's just not getting really a transparent response. We're getting some sugar-coated version of it. B, it's this guy needs to play, but if we go to the draft and let's say, we don't land on a safety at all? Well, maybe we're going to spend the year trying to figure out how he fits into that, which is what they kind of did at points towards the end of the season, messing around with it, where Zion learned everything. To me, Zion's going to be playing next year, and that's all that matters. And I think for this team, and certainly for Todd Bowles and his defense, Zion is going to be a part of the equation. And for us, from the outside looking in, whether it's media or fans, I don't think we're privy to the array of options that are on their table right now. But I would not be surprised if a guy like Carlton was traded. A, that's a cap relief. B, they get another draft pick, which they're down a pick this year. So if he was traded, then you put Zion into that slot. Almost certainly, you then go back into the draft, get another cornerback, and keep that mechanism flowing. But it was a very interesting tidbit. But my takeaway was Zion McCullum, don't worry about where he's playing. He's playing. And remember, he used, 2 years ago, he did a similar thing with Antoine Winfield Jr. And look how he turned out, right? He's moved to every year. 2 years ago, we're going to move Antoine everywhere. Last year, we're going to keep him in one spot and be our center fielder. So, Todd, he does like to find out what he has in his switchblade, and then he will deploy whatever is necessary in that moment.
Well, see, and that's why I like bringing these things up, is because you took it a very different way than I took it. I like your way much better, so I've just adopted that as my perspective as well. But what are the Buccaneers going to do to replace a key player at a position of need? That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Get buckets on your first bet with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, futures bets, and more. Right now, the Boston Celtics are favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 260, while defending champion Denver Nuggets are the favorites out of the Western Conference at plus 440. And FanDuel already has odds up for Super Bowl 59, where the San Francisco 49ers are the favorites at plus 500. The Kansas City Chiefs are plus 650 to go ahead and three-peat, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are tied with the New Orleans Saints, Las Vegas Raiders, Arizona Cardinals, and Seattle Seahawks at plus 7,500. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Wrapping things up here on a Thursday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And it was announced that Shaq Barrett is going to be released. Start of the new league year. That was obviously came to light at the scouting combine. Talked about that a lot on yesterday's episode. And we've talked a lot on this show about the need for edge rusher. I have talked about it a lot on Mock Draft Mondays. Evan, you've been bringing it up basically anytime we've talked about the draft. And you and I both have edge rusher as the Bucs' #1 priority this offseason. As far as the world of free agency is concerned, obviously there are players out there that the Bucs could try to get. Brian Burns, Leonard Floyd, Josh Allen, Bryce Huff. But a point that I was trying to make on yesterday's episode was that if the Bucs are cutting ties with Barrett, it's because the money doesn't match the production. And they made this as a business move. And they're probably eyeing the draft and looking to spend a top pick on an edge guy that they can use for the next 4 or 5 years at an affordable cost rather than throwing money at some of these big name edge rusher guys. So what do you feel is the best strategy for the Bucs to replace Shaq Barrett, and who do you have your eye on, whether that's in the draft or maybe if they try to, if they try to get lightning to strike twice and they find one of these lesser known edge rushers in free agency, the way they did with Shaq Barrett, is there one of those guys that maybe you think they would go after?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends. Obviously, looking at the draft is important, but if we're to believe that Todd Bowles says number 26 is going to be best player available, is that going to be an edge guy? Are we going to see Chop Robinson that late? Jared Verse? Go down the list here. Jonah Ellis. I've seen so many mock rankings where some of these guys are top 10 and then they're out of the top 32. So there's a lot of variability there. And I will say edge is the toughest to nail in the draft. It is really, really hard. To me, I would like to pursue someone who's proven they can do it before. I've mentioned this before. I would like to see what Huff's number would be. Even I don't know if the Jets are going to just re-sign him anyway, but I would like to see what his number would be, because that's a guy who I think hasn't seen a lot of playing time, and on the Bucs would maybe thrive with more of it, like Shaq Barrett did when he came to town. But they are going to be spending a lot of money on free agents. They have a ton of money right now. It's all going to be gone soon. So I don't necessarily know exactly how they're going to move, but I would be shocked if edge was not the priority entering that first round, and for them to really get the guy that they want. If they have two, if they got their board and their edge guy is number 3 on their board and, 1 or 2 are right there, maybe they reach down to take that edge guy, but it's still got to be in the atmosphere of where they're selecting. So I lean towards the draft. I just know that it's not going to necessarily solve the problems next year if they go that route. Even though, a guy like Elijah Cansey was able to make an instant impact, it's tough to find them on the edge. It's even tougher to find them on the edge. And, that will be the struggle that this team has to go through the entire offseason. And they really, really need to hit on that spot, because they're just a different team without having anything off the edge. And that's why these past 2 years, the defense has not been as successful. It just, what we saw during that Super Bowl run when Shaq was really at full strength, and, you have Jason Pierre-Paul, and you have Sue, and you have Vea, and Vea came back super late that season. When you have that up front, that's why Devin White was able to get so many sacks, because it's like, what the hell am I supposed to do stopping these guys? But Shaq was a veteran. JPP was a veteran off the edge. Ndamukong Suh was a veteran inside. Vea was homegrown. So it just to be determined. But we will, when we get to draft coverage, we will talk about our favorite edge guys and go through all those options. And, once we get a little bit closer, I take, a ton of mock drafts, throw them into a hopper, get an average draft position, throw out the top 15, and then really start talking about where we can realistically look and what the Buccaneers are maybe going to get.
As you mentioned, it's a really hard position to nail down in the draft, right? You had Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who you drafted just a few years ago. He hasn't panned out the way that you hoped, but then you spend a 3rd round pick on Yaya Diaby, and he looks like a viable, legitimate starter. So that's the joy of the draft. That's why I always laugh when people talk about like these can't miss prospects and you have to take this guy. And it's like, people were talking all season, the Bucs need to start Trask and Baker stinks, and the Bucs have to draft a quarterback in the first round. It's like, when you're talking about quarterbacks in the first round, they are at best over the last 10 years, a coin flip, literally a coin flip. And the deeper you get into these rounds, the less chance you have on hitting. So yeah, I always kind of laugh at that, but yeah, we're going to continue to talk about edge rusher till we're blue in the face.
Yeah. Very quickly as we end up here, I know we're running out of time. The thing is, Shaq was a lot of money for not a lot of production. This is professional. Personally, we love Shaq.
Yes.
Another day we got to have a discussion about the possibility of him in the Ring of Honor. But from a professional standpoint, it seems like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka next year can probably fulfill his role, at least as an edge run defender. I think Joe does that well. I think Logan Hall, to a degree, can stop the run well. I think they got enough good run stuffers, in a sense, that's really what Shaq excelled at last year. When you watch the tape, is he was really, really good against the run, but they don't need more of that. They need someone who can get after the QB. And you think back to the 22 draft when they traded down, and the Chiefs get Karlaftis, and that between him and a couple of safeties that were on the board, I believe that was part of their clump where they said, oh, there's a group of guys that we like, and whoever we get will be happy with. And ultimately, Devontae Wyatt was also on that. I bet was on that list. And, they kind of just watched their guys go, and Logan Hall was the last one left. I don't know if they'll make that the mistake this time around. If they got, if there's an edge guy who they think can help. I think the Buccaneers would be more willing to trade up a little bit this year than a little bit back. And I think if they do trade up, I think it is going to be for someone to get after the QB.
Yeah, the only time they're going to need that many run stoppers is when they play Carolina. Dave Canales in Indianapolis on Wednesday talking about how stubborn he's going to be with the run game. We know that too well, but love Dave.
Well, you know what? If it goes anything like that happened with the Buccaneers, then that's good for Tampa Bay.
Yeah, well, I mean, they raised their running yards per game average 20 yards in the second half of the season. So, once they figured out how to get it to work, it worked. But I do still love Dave Canales, but I had to bring that up just because of how upset it made Buccaneers fans that he was so stubborn about it. But that's going to do it for this episode. Please make sure you are coming back tomorrow as we wrap up the week. In the meantime, check out everything that Evan is doing over on 10 Tampa Bay and at 10tampabay.com. Check out what I'm doing over at bucksnation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, at eClaskey WTSP. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Bucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.